Those round numbers.
Welcome to Baseball and Coffee, episode 40 with Tino and Aaron. What's up, Aaron?
Not much. How are you?
I'm good, man. Just getting over being a little bit sick, but can't complain. Can't complain.
Yeah.
Still have my health. This episode, we are going to talk a little TGFBI strategy. We're both going to give a couple of players we see as kind of ascending for the rest of the season. Maybe a couple players that we think might have peaked and are descending, maybe some sell highs, if you will. One prospect deep dive each, and then if we have some time, we're going to talk in open forum about our home league trade deadline coming up tomorrow, and then games that we're excited for tonight and tomorrow. Let's get started. You got a coffee story for me, Aaron?
I do. I'm actually having a little bit of it now, but I had recently had this week some sun-dried Rwanda.
Mm-hmm.
It was a really nice balanced sun-dried coffee. The more to the story is someone I work with used to be a farmer, and he still has friends who farm, and he helps in the fall peach harvest. And so he brought in a bunch of fresh Pennsylvania peaches that he had cut up from this harvest this past week.
Mm-hmm.
And this was the coffee we chose to brew. And yeah, it is a really good coffee. I'm not, as we've talked about, sun-dried or specialty processed coffees, and tend to be really sought after. And I think both of our preferences have drifted more towards, balance and things like that. But it is fun to have that natural once in a while. And yeah, it was just super thoughtful of Joel to bring in that fresh produce. And that's another love of mine, is just, eating seasonally, eating fresh, food. It's just, I think there's just a real enriching thing to that. So it was just great and in all respects.
Since I haven't been in coffee in a few years, working in coffee in a few years, I do have a question. What are there other precautions that we've been able to take as an industry to keep things like contamination and potato bugs away from some of the different coffees that I think historically had high concentrations of those? I think that's literally my immediate thought when I think of Rwandan coffee is not how beautiful it is. It's potato bugs, right?
Mm.
And so since you are still in coffee, is there anything that we're doing as an industry to be able to eradicate that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was on a call with some agronomists from Rwanda and some co-ops, and they spoke a little bit about some of the things they were trying to do to figure out what it is. They think it's an insect. At some point, there's an insect that enters into the coffee cherry or the bean at some point in its life cycle and leaves behind some sort of residual. But they're doing all this. There's quite a bit of research that's gone into it, and they just haven't quite been able to exactly crack it
Mm-hmm.
to know why. And the only really thing you can do is catch it catch it on arrival by tasting it, making
Right.
sure it's not present. Yeah, in terms of origin, it's kind of a mystery, honestly. I mean, again, I think it's something to do with an insect that they haven't been able to figure out exactly when it happens, despite their efforts.
Got it. I just I don't know that I could pay money for Rwandan coffee at this point in time, given my experiences. I literally, and this is granted, it was, 10, 15 years ago, but I think every other bag of coffee that I would buy from a roaster that was Rwandan would be spoiled because of potato bugs. And I just decided, as a shop owner, I decided what just wasn't worth it to me anymore to
Mm.
even mess with it. So, but it's still beautiful. Still beautiful. Um, I don't have much. Like I said, I've been, I guess full disclosure, I've had COVID for the last week and a half or so, and I guess all I'll say with regards to coffee is that um I think if you could take away all the food and all the stuff that we typically have, I still had my coffee and I still needed my coffee every day. So there's still that level of dependence on it. But other than that, I don't really have much to share. I really haven't been out of the house in the last week or so. So uh let's see here. Aaron, if you're there, I want to take a quick detour. So I'm getting messages right now. So this is for those who have a home league that they are deeply invested in and kind of dominates their thought process, even if you are such as we are in top 10 in TGFBI. We still, I think, obsess over our home leagues more than anything. My detour here is what do you do? And I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot, and it's a subject that I think is both sensitive.
You like to do that, let's be honest.
Yes, I'm not intentionally, but I think things come up sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Um,
I was always here, by the way. I just had to get more coffee. I
no
didn't want to
worries.
step off camera while I walked away.
My my question is, I think so I'll preface it with one of the few times I find myself not being able to control my own emotions, which does not happen very often, right? It's very, very, very rare personally when I can't to have times where I can't control how I feel. But one of the few times in my life is when or during trade negotiations in our home league. I find myself getting incredibly angry and frustrated. And to me, we were going to talk about some of this, but I feel like it's worth having a conversation right now, kind of impromptu, given the fact that the deadline is tomorrow.
Sure.
So I'll just give an example and then we can work from there.
Okay.
I am willing to trade Fernando Tatis Jr. at this point in time, especially if I can get something that will help me in the immediate, given his 80-game suspension and being out for about the first month or so, month and maybe 5 weeks at the beginning of next season. I love him. I love his potential. I think he's the only player in baseball that has 50-50 potential. He's a shortstop. He's probably the most talented player in the game. He's definitely, I think, a top 3 talent, regardless of what you think of him. And yet, at this point, I wouldn't say I'm frustrated with him, but I would say that I am willing to part with him if it can help me win a championship.
Sure.
Yes, he tested positive. Yes, he's a little bit of you can't really rely upon him. I've heard all the comments from the Padres players about not being able to rely on him and trust him and all those things. But the fucking offers I'm getting for him right now and the conversations that I'm having with people about what his value is, it's an insult for the most part.
Yeah.
And I get that they're trying to buy him low, but there's buying low and then there's trying to argue it with me and trying to present the reasons why he's not worth what I think he's worth.
Yeah.
I literally resorted to, in one conversation yesterday, you're in 14th place and you're about 70 games out. I don't think you're in a place to tell me how to evaluate players. Sorry. Like, I was that pissed off.
Mm.
So I guess what I'm asking you is, because I know we both have these reactions, right? And they're irrational. And I 100% admit to the fact that they're irrational. There are very few things in my life. Like, I'm a pretty unemotional, I'm a passionate person, but a pretty unemotional guy, right? I think
What's the difference? Passion and emotion. Can you
I think
define that
there's a huge
so I
difference. I think
understand?
passion is being excitable, right? Passion is being
Okay.
intense.
Okay.
Passion is also being able to kind of control that energy, right? Passion is energy
Mm.
to me. It's
Okay.
investment. So I'm passionate about fantasy baseball. I invest my time, I invest my energy. It's where it's how I interact with my closest friends, right? Emotion is more like I'm sad, I'm happy, I'm pissed off, right? I'm
Okay.
frustrated,
Okay.
that sort of thing.
Okay.
And so I'm just not that emotional. I don't emote. I'm not that kind of guy. But I swear to you, man, like, it's insulting. And I don't know if it's the kind of, I've gotten like, I think 4 out of every 5 offers on Tatis have been the kind where they hope that you mistakenly push accept and then argue it with the commissioner, right? It's that kind of offer. It's Wilson Contreras for Fernando Tatis. It's unwilling to give up. It's being insulted. I'm asking for Bryce Harper for Fernando Tatis. Like, that's an insult, right? I'm sorry. As much as I love Harper, Tatis is twice the player in fantasy. Harper doesn't steal bags. Harper's also injured. Harper's an outfielder. He's not a shortstop, right? There's a reason why you're in 14th, Freddie. I'm sorry. And yes, I am going to post this one. It fucking pissed me off. So I just, again, I think we can have a rational conversation about, we both have players that we really, really like, right? An example for you might be Spencer Torkelson, who hasn't performed well, but he's a player you stuck with. He's a player that you had before he was drafted. He's a player that you love. And I think there's a lot of reason to think that he's still going to be the player we thought he was going to be. But I'm sure you've also gotten some shit offers for him. How do you process that, right? I guess I'm asking for some therapy or some help right now because
Yeah.
it obviously has set me off a bit.
Um, trying to meet in the middle on player value, I think, is very difficult. In this sort of in our league, because I think our setup is kind of unique. And you have different ways that people again evaluate how to prioritize players within that. And I don't think necessarily everyone looks at the strategy or how players' values may be impacted by our format.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I just think that there is a, I think there are only a few players. I don't want to say that not everyone's reasonable. Like I said, a lot of people are looking for an advantage, or necessarily they want to get something for, I don't say free, but on it, like you said, on a discount. I had an owner ask me, have you considered posting Sandy Alcantara?
Mm-hmm.
And I said no. And they asked me why. And I was like, because I've learned that like the league by in general doesn't really value pitching.
Right.
And so for me to post someone who's been a big part of what I've done and the success that my roster has had this year, knowing I'm going to get 50 cents on the dollar because he's a starting pitcher, there's kind of just have learned that. But in terms of like coping with the emotion, I think it's a tough thing. I think because we get emotionally invested in our players, they're not just commodities to us.
Right.
But I think just knowing that, I guess the only thing I can say is like we just don't have control over other people, and I've had honestly very little success trying to convince people or change their minds, and having to come to my perspective.
Right.
So it's but it is negotiation. So there is some degree where you have to explain your side, but at the same time, it can get a little bit tough when you feel like the other person is not um, maybe coming to the table with 100% honestly. But I
Right.
think just going into those conversations, just knowing, or maybe having like a low expectation of success, or treating it as, just knowing that these people may not, or these owners may not see things the way I see them.
Right.
I guess I think once the interaction happens and you get the disappointment, like having that emotion is just human because we're invested. I think the way to maybe have more success coping in the future is just pre-framing it, entering into the conversation of what your expectations are, or these are some of the things that I know I'm probably going to run into. I think that would maybe help process through it once it happens.
Right. I Yes, I agree, and I don't know that I always do that. I also don't think asking for Bryce Harper for Fernando Tatis Jr. is like extraordinary, right? And so at some point, it's more of like in my opinion, there should be a baseline of baseball understanding, right? There's this baseline of knowledge that we all have in order to participate in a league such as ours. And I think people want to throw that out the window when it comes to negotiations and act like they don't know, right? Asking for either George Kirby or Robbie Ray in exchange for Sean Murphy, who's a catcher who's barely over the line of who we can pick up off the waiver wire, right? Granted, he's performed well over the last 2 months, but he's a catcher in Oakland who's not that good. And asking for a pitcher who had 250 strikeouts last year and is on pace for like 215 this year, right? Pitching for a playoff team with a good defense and a big park behind him, or one of the best young pitchers in baseball in George Kirby, is just ludicrous. It's absolutely ludicrous. And to hold on to that and to act like either A, I don't know what I'm talking about, or B, that's just what your player is worth, to me is like, this has literally made me leave a league like 10 years ago because I got so
Yeah.
frustrated with the trade negotiations. And I shouldn't. Again, this is me being irrational and being
Yeah.
emotional at a point where I don't want to be. But the reality is that I was just stunned. I was stunned.
Yeah.
Now, I will say that there are times where we don't know where other people are coming from, right?
Mm.
And I think sometimes will say things to us to try to motivate us to do things that they think are right, even for us, right? If they're friends. Um, the Alcantara thing, I know how much you love him. But I also, if I'm being objective and I look at your team objectively, I would say dealing pitching for OPS and hitting where you are in the standings right now is the right thing to do because your knowledge base and your skills are in finding great pitching that other people don't see yet. And so that would be leveraging your own skill to be able to improve a part of your team that maybe is the piece that you need in order to win a championship, right? If I was looking at your team objectively, I might say that. Now, I wouldn't suggest Alcantara because that's your guy, right? It's like telling me to trade Julio. I'm not trading Julio. But I get the gist of the comment, right? The comment itself makes sense. Now, sorry to go off. Like
No, it's okay.
I'm so and I also think this is relatable for most anybody who plays fantasy baseball, right?
Right.
There's
And
this
I think
point.
the other thing I would say too is like we compete in a couple of leagues where you and I can't make trades. And in one league's a draft and hold. So we have the roster that we have, and we have probably, I'm not exaggerating, 17 pitchers
Right,
who are on the IL, and
right,
we literally have the best lineup in the league, and we
right,
can't improve our pitching to match it because everyone's hurt and
right,
we have no options. And we're in TGFBI, and we're going to talk about maybe how to tweak our roster to push for an overall.
right,
Again, we don't have trades as an option.
right,
You know, so yeah, it's a double-edged sword of, yes, at least in this format in our home league, we have the ability to trade to try to improve our roster. We're not limited to waiver wire, to try to fix a deficiency. But yeah, unfortunately, it does come with this stew of emotion and negotiation. And I would say, on the positive, one of the things that I appreciate about some members in our league, and one of the things that I value about being in a long-term league, is being able to have conversations about players. I know that you approach it more transactionally, but I think for me, being a bit of a processor, I enjoy the owners that I can say, "Hey, is this guy available? How do you value him? Just being able to kind of understand their perspective." And so,
sure,
even if it doesn't come to fruition, like, instead of just I kind of like have went that road down with them, or went down that path with them, that I understand their perspective. Like, okay, I don't say we may agree on compensation, so it doesn't happen, but we've had a conversation, and I feel like I see where you're coming from, even though I don't necessarily share your view. You know what I mean?
right,
And I think that helps. I enjoy that. Again, it doesn't lead to a lot of deals in some senses. And I think we've talked a little bit about that, about how I can be a more effective trader. But I do value the opportunity to have conversations with people. So, and I appreciate the people that will respond for sure. Um, I've my long-term catcher, has sustained a third injury and probably it's going to take him out for the season. So I've been talking all week to reaching out to fellow GMs who have catcher backups or catcher depth, and just, is this guy available? And almost every single one has gotten back to me and given me an answer. And I'm really grateful for that, because it's really hard when you see options out there and the communication isn't there. So it's
Right.
another thing that I don't try not to take for granted.
Right. I have to say too, like, if you place a value on each player from 0 to 10, if I offer somebody a 7 and they offer back a 5 or a 6, that's fine. Like, I get it, and it's a dance, right? You might go through 3, 4, 5, 6 counters before you get to a place where you actually land on a trade that works. I get that it's a dance. I try to meet the other managers somewhere in the middle if I can, pretty quickly. I don't, it's hard to nail people down to communicate a whole bunch. So in my opinion, like, I don't really need any of the fluff. Let's try to be value wise, 6 for a 7, even 2 5s for a 7, whatever it might be. Like, let's try to meet somewhere there. But when it's like I'm offering Tatis, who's a 10, and you're offering me a fucking catcher, like, it doesn't work. A catcher that I used to own, it doesn't work, right? I don't care if Tatis is hurt. It doesn't work for me. Or if you're unwilling to offer Harper, who doesn't offer any steals and is a borderline first round pick and maybe a high second round pick next year, and you're unwilling to include him in a deal, it doesn't work, right? So I guess for me, it's more about trying to be like rational. I get that you're not always going to get equal value. I get it. Makes sense to me. But there's such a thing as being fair, and there's such a thing as being and I don't respect, if you're in 14th place and you don't know what the fuck you're talking about, I don't necessarily respect you when you come at me that way. All right, I'm done. I got to stop before I go off anymore. Our trade deadline is 9 o'clock tomorrow. It should be very interesting. You sit in first, I sit in second. I think we're both pretty much assured a playoff spot, top 6. It's more about whether each of us get a bye heading into the playoffs, because the top 2 teams get a bye. So really, we're trying to tweak our teams more than anything else, I think, because we are in the playoffs, and in the playoffs anything can happen. But I don't like getting insulted by teams that are in 14th place. I just don't. It doesn't make any sense to me. Moving on, if we can, before I get myself in any more trouble. So we were going to talk about a little bit about our strategy in TGFBI. We currently sit in 6th place in the overall out of 465, and in 1st place in our 15-team TGFBI league. I have a couple of just bigger takeaways, if I may.
Yeah, of course.
The first one is that I don't know that, because our team is very good, obviously, there's not a whole lot on the waiver wire that we can do to improve our team. I think there's once in a while we can bid on someone who might be coming up to the majors who others hadn't rostered. But other than that, I think it's a mistake to tinker too much. I think we are tinkerers, and our instinct is to try to improve on the margins. But I think that would be a mistake with the team that is this good. What I put in notes for our TGFBI team in my notes for the pod is don't fuck it up. That's literally what I typed. I said, don't mess with the good thing. There are players, we have the players that have the upside to make us even better already. We have Acuna, we have Julio, we have O'Neal Cruz. And I think those are the types of players that still have more improvement to be had at the end of the year. We even have the starting pitching, knock on wood, the starting pitching to be able to maybe sustain an injury down the stretch, right? I just think that our team is pretty set up. What is your takeaway as far as us improving, or do we just ride this out and hope to finish, top 10, or hope to finish top 5?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I mean, we're improving on the margins. I certainly don't want to take anything for granted because it's baseball, but um, I think in terms of our satellite league, the league that we were assigned to, we have a pretty rock solid league, our lead, and are really one of the more balanced teams, in the league. And I think that's what's been, the secret of our success. The secret sauce, as it were, is we didn't draft with a gimmick of um, trying to, take on steals or punt saves, or we really tried to get value with every pick. And I think that's the thing I'm most proud of this team, is just how balanced it is. But yeah, looking at it, what I saw is, for the overall, we're 11th overall in pitching and we're 45th in hitting. So just on the surface, you would say, there's more opportunity on the hitting side.
Mm-hmm.
When I dove into the individual stats on the hitting side, in looking at the teams that are above us, the first thing that stuck out to me is we have significantly fewer at bats than the top hitting teams.
Mm-hmm.
About 400 or 500 fewer at bats. And we're 19 weeks into the season, so you can do the math there. So that was one of the things that I wrote down, is just, at bats equals, runs and RBI, and also gives you an opportunity to move up in batting average, the more opportunities you have. So that was something to me. I know that that could be a couple things that can contribute to that. One is, our catcher position is ones where we've worked on the margins to make it, progressively better as we've gone, but probably have given up some at bats there.
Mm-hmm.
And then just also maybe thinking that as we look at the schedule each week, maybe being willing to, for our non superstars, to set guys who maybe have an extra day off or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the other thing that I noticed on the hitting side was, again, batting average. So I think with us taking on a couple high upside rookies and Julio and O'Neill Cruz, we've certainly absorbed some of their learning curve. We also have Kyle Schwarber. So I mean, those are three pretty big drags on our batting average. Now Julio is certainly not hurting us there anymore, but we absorbed, that first month and a half where he was adjusting to major league pitching. So those stats are banked, and Schwarber's not going anywhere. So I don't know how much we can realistically move there, but I think, again, if as you make decisions on the lineup decisions on the margins, if we have someone who think is just a better hitter,
Mm-hmm.
and that may be just a mindset shift for me, as coming from an OPS league. I'm looking so much more at power and on base, and just paying more attention to that category. So those are my kind of takeaways on offense. I don't know if you have thoughts. Nothing major, but just some things to keep in mind as we move forward.
The only real thought is Julio just called me and wanted me to let you know he's hitting 275. So I don't think that I think he's an addition to the average and not a
Oh,
subtraction.
he certainly is now. But I think we've, like kind of like what O'Neill Cruz is doing now so far. Like, right, we absorbed that initial,
Sure.
run. So you
I think
bank
that
that.
Schwarber's the big one, right? You know, if you are in an average league, I think Schwarber is one who has to be surrounded by players like Stephen Kwan, because he is, going to be a low 200s hitter who's hitting at the top of a lineup and having a ton of at bats. But no, I think you're right. And I think the big thing is, at this point in the season, your team is going to be what it is,
Yeah.
and you have to kind of continue to stick with what you have. And I think this actually applies to to home leagues as well,
Oh, absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
Unless you're willing to make a huge blockbuster trade, there's not a whole lot that you can do on the margins to really impact your team. It's the wire's been scoured, right? There are not a lot of other rookies that are going to be coming up that are going to be able to make a big difference with your team. And you're either going to make a move for a player, or you're going to ride it out. I think that's a big misconception, is that at the deadline you can really, kind of change your team. But in order to get something, you have to give something up as well. So unless you're mortgaging your future, I think it is really hard to truly alter your team. I think we are right now who or who we are going to be at the end of the season is going to be who we are right now for the most part. But I think that's especially applicable in a TGFBI league where the waiver wire is the only way that you can improve.
Yeah.
But I'm proud of where we are as a team. I do think that there's more upside. Um, I do think that if we did find a way to move up, it would be an injury, unfortunately, on with a team that um, is above us, or an injury where a couple of the teams above us have the same player. That's the way that we would move up at this point in time, because I don't necessarily see us being able to leapfrog just based on what we have.
On the pitching side, I think strikeouts is an area where we could move. However, I think as I look at it, I kind of crossed that out because I put protect our ratios, because I mean, overall, I can't remember how many teams are in this thing. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we're fifth in WHIP and eighth in ERA
Right.
over the whole thing. So, throwing in extra pitchers to try to move up in strikeouts, I think there's more to be lost than gained.
Agreed.
I think getting Freddie, that's one of the reasons why I was excited to get Peralta before he came back from injury. Spent about 30% of our remaining budget, and we still have the sixth most money left in our budget, despite that high bid for Peralta. But I went heavy on him because I thought he was someone who could really maybe impact that category while not risking our ratios, because he's a quality pitcher.
Right.
But yeah, fun team. It's been a real positive.
It's been a pleasure. It's been super cool. All right, let's take a quick break. We'll come back with our ascending and descending players for the last portion of the season. And then if we have time, get into prospect deep dive. I do think we covered, for the most part, our open forum question already, but if we have more for that, we can do that too. See you in a minute.
All right.
All right, Aaron. We're both going to share a player or two that we feel are ascending, and that are players that at the deadline, if they were available, you would want to have on your team, and might be of greater value at the end of the year than they are right now. Who's your first player that fits that description?
So I looked at pitching,
Uh-huh.
and I looked at players who we just entered the last third of the season by games for the MLB season. And so I looked at the players whose middle third improved or decreased over their season-long numbers. And I looked at K minus VB improvers and also CR improvers as a secondary. And I filtered out anyone who didn't have at least a 15% K minus VB rate. Couple players that stood out to me, a lot of relievers on this list, but one reliever that stood out to me was Ronaldo Lopez. I wanted to talk about him briefly because he came up as a starter with Washington, was traded I believe he was part of the Giolito trade back in the day.
He was.
And ironically, now they're teammates on the White Sox, but Ronaldo's moved to the bullpen. He has did three things this year that really stand out to me. His improvement on his breaking pitches, which for him are his, trying to hear, I just pulled up his curveball and his slider, his whiff rates, as well as his changeup. His curveball and his changeup, his whiff rates have increased dramatically. In 2020 and 2021, respectively, the whiff rates on those two pitches were 13 to 14%. Whereas this year, his whiff rate on his curveball is 38.1%, and his changeup is 41%. So we talk a lot about the ability for right-handers to have a changeup, just to see that improvement on his breaking pitches. And that shows up in his stuff. His stuff plus is 115, which is exceptional. The other things he's done is his command has improved. His career low walk rate this year is 4.5%. And then there's also his ground ball rate is up 10% to 47%. He popped on this list in the middle third of the season. His K minus V rate improved by 12% over his season long numbers, and his Sierra dropped by almost 1.2 runs. So he's not closing games, but he's a player with this skill set change that I'll be looking at in 2023 in the bullpen for the White Sox. As a skilled reliever who's just evolving. We know not everyone makes it as a starter. I was having a conversation with Laura this week about like how guys, not everyone is a starter and how they evolve into two relievers. But this skill set change is really intriguing to me.
Mm-hmm.
So for fantasy, probably not the rest of the season, not anyone that I necessarily have to roster, but I thought it was an interesting guy that popped and
Mm-hmm.
interesting to see what he's done. The two pitchers I want to talk about rising and fading were Charlie Morton and Tyler Mahle. Um, it's Mahle, right? Is that how you pronounce it?
Molly.
Mahle,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So it's funny because we just talked about Morton recently when we did our pitcher ranks. I was a little bit higher on him than you were. But what was interesting to me looking at these both of these guys improved their K minus BB and popped on this list. And they're also their season long numbers. Their WHIP is basically identical, as is their walk rates. However, Charlie Morton's strikeout rate's a little bit higher. But when I looked at the two, I would actually fade Morton
Mm-hmm.
and prefer Tyler Mahle because not just the park change, but when I looked at their arsenal, you know, Mahle has a four pitch mix. He has four pitches he throws at least 10% of the time,
Mm-hmm.
whereas Charlie Morton throws his fastball or curveball almost 70% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because, you know, when you watch Charlie Morton pitch, my experience of him is that he just throws those two pitches. But when I looked at his Savant page, he actually does register three other pitches that he throws between 8 and 11% of the time. But when I watch him pitch, I don't feel like I ever see him throw
Yeah, you
those
just see
pitches.
you see
It's
you see
like
four
fastball,
seam and
curveball.
four
Yeah.
seam and curveball, and that's all you see for
And
sure.
but yeah, he really relies on that curveball because he gets a 41% whiff rate on that curveball.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that really stuck out to me, despite them both being improvers in the middle third of the season so far, Morton's home run per nine is 1.32, whereas Molly's is 1.16. And when I look at their heat maps, which is something I wish I could display on our pod in the future, maybe we'll be able to do that. I would encourage anyone who's listening to go look at their heat maps on Savant. If you look at Molly's heat maps, his location is, you know, he's not throwing in the middle of the plate. He's throwing his four seam 50% of the time, but it's almost exclusively in the top third of the
Mm-hmm.
zone.
Mm-hmm.
But you look at, and the same thing with his split, his cutter, and his slider, he's avoiding the heart of the plate.
Right.
And so I look at the ability to command his pitches like that and stay out of the middle of the plate. I think that home run rate's going to continue to fall now that he's out of Cincinnati. Whereas I look at heat maps for Morton, he's throwing a lot of pitches in the middle of the zone, especially with his four seam and his sinker. And so I look at that home run rate. I think it's going to stay there, maybe even go up. Despite that big swing and miss pitch with a curveball, and despite his track record, again, I would say I would buy Molly and I would sell Morton,
Mm-hmm.
which is ironic because not the way I had him ranked, but after looking at these guys more closely for this exercise and looking how they improved in the middle third,
Mm-hmm.
I would buy what Molly's doing, especially being out of Cincinnati.
Sure. I find it interesting that, if we rewind a little bit, the meat of this conversation for me is kind of how we start searching, right? So you started your search with parameters around Sierra and K minus BB and went from there. And I think that when I started the search, interestingly, and I understanding that this isn't a fantasy category, but I just started with I started at June 6th, right? And went from June 6th until now. And I just hit pitcher war and then
Okay.
started looking for pitchers who stood out in my mind that I wouldn't have expected to be on that leaderboard.
Okay.
Who I wouldn't have. And so for me, there's some probably erroneously, there's some intuition that I start with before I start digging deeper, right? Let me sort by Fangraphs WAR since June 6th for pitching in the major leagues. Oh, that guy stands out. Oh, that guy's not a guy expected to be there. Why is he
Mm-hmm.
there? What is he doing? What's changed in his performance? And then what I did is I went back and then sorted. I didn't sort. I take a picture and then I would just bring up their stats from the beginning of the season until June 6th. And so I put them side by side on two different screens and compared those statistics for the first third and the second third, and went from there. And so my pitcher in doing that was, it's low hanging fruit, but I think the more you dig, the more it really does support, is Luis Castillo, who obviously was traded from Cincinnati Reds to the Seattle Mariners at the deadline. So Castillo is 3-1 with a 2.30 ERA since June 6th, and he's got he's in 66 and 2/3 innings. What I found interesting is that in 9 of his 10 starts, he's gone 6+ innings. And in 9 of his 10 starts, he's allowed 3 runs or less. And in none of those starts has he allowed more than 6 hits. And so to me, in his past 10 starts, he's been at the absolute model of consistency. You dig a little deeper and you see that his K rate is and his walk rates are pretty stable from the first third and the second third of the season. And his whip is also pretty stable. His 1.01 whip since June 6th, and on the season it's 1.07. Interestingly, his ground ball rate has gone down a little bit, which I think may for him help him. I think that's more indicative of the fact that his 4-seam has become his best pitch. And so he's relying less on the 2-seam fastball to get ground balls. The other bigger number is that since June 6th, he's had a 12.7% swinging strike rate. And on the year, it's 11.9%. So coming into beginning of the season to June 6th is probably somewhere around 10%, if you want to do the math there. So one other factor to consider is that his park factor in the park factor for Great American Ballpark currently in 2022 is 109. So it's 9% more friendly to hitters. And T-Mobile is at the bottom of that list at 93. So it's 7% less friendly than average. So he's going from bad park to good park, bad defense to good defense, right? And his skill set is continuing to improve. The other numbers I wanted to include are that really it's about his 4-seam fastball. In 2021, he got a 30.5% whiff rate on his 4-seam. In 2022, it's up to 36.7%. So that's a 6.2% increase on whiff rate on his 4-seam. And his K percentage on the 4-seam went from 31.3% to 43.5%. It went from a +4 run value pitch to a -11 run value pitch from 21 to 22. The average went from 257 last year to 127 this year, and from 478 slug last year to 186 slug this year.
Wow.
So basically what I see in Castillo is a 4-seam that he's changed the shape on, right? And it's become one of the best 4-seam fastballs in baseball. He went from a horrible pitcher's park to a great pitcher's park. He went from a bad defense to a good defense. He went from a good offense behind him, or bad offense behind him, to a good offense behind him. And he's the model of consistency. So if nothing else, you're getting 6 innings, 3 runs or less, 6 hits or less on a bad outing, right? And probably 6 strikeouts. On a good outing, you're getting 7 to 8 innings, 9 or 10 strikeouts, fewer hits than innings. And he doesn't really walk that many batters either. So to me, Castillo, I know the price in any league for Luis Castillo is going to be high, but I think that you're looking at from this point forward, you're looking at pretty much an ace, right? Or at minimum ace potential. And I think his floor is an SP2. And he's a pitcher that I would target as a top 10 pitcher heading into 2023, given his new team and park context and the way that he's using his 4-seam. The one last thing that I would add is I would expect maybe even more improvement from Castillo, because the way that the Mariners nurture and teach pitching and tweak pitching, they're at a much more advanced level than the Cincinnati Reds are at this point in time, organizationally speaking. So Castillo for me is a pitcher that's very much on the ascent.
Interesting that we both talked about Reds that have new teams.
We did. We absolutely did. I did do one hitter real quickly. That hitter for me is Adley Rutschman. This is not, I guess maybe it is somewhat of a victory lap in that I ranked him 4th overall amongst catchers coming into the season. And I had him in my top 5 for the second half of the season as well. Since July 6th, his triple slash is 284, 402, 497 for an 899 OPS. This is when I did these notes, which was yesterday. 15.7% walk rate and a 14.2% K rate for a 24-year-old rookie, and a 157 WRC plus. The one thing he's not doing is hitting for power yet. He's got a 7.3% barrel and only an 88.6 mile per hour average exit, but he's got a 15-degree launch angle. We know he's got the power in that body. And I think the more he is really able to drill down and find the pitches that he's looking for, the more power we'll see. I think he's exactly what I thought he was coming into the season, which is a 300, 380 or 390 OBP and potentially in a 500 slug, kind of 900 OPS sort of hitter. I might not have expected him to be that immediately, but it's turning out that that's pretty much the player that he is. Again, the only other step that I think he has left is to see whether it's 20 home run power or 30 home run power in that bat. But super, super impressive. Probably not available in most leagues. He's certainly not available in our home league, but a player that I think is phenomenal and is pretty cool to watch. He's made the Orioles a really exciting team for me.
I don't know. It's not fantasy related, but his thing where I'm sure you've seen this when they end the game, the way he goes out to the pitcher.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what I've never seen a catcher who consistently does that, but he just has this joyful exuberance and supportive energy for the pitcher every single time.
Right.
It's when the game closes, it's really different. I've never seen that from a catcher.
I think he's just a really genuine leader, right?
Yeah, it seems like it.
And
It
it's
seems like
something that
it's really fun.
it is, and I think it's really, he's had a tremendous impact on the vibe of that organization. I don't think I don't think you can undersell that as much as I'm not an intangible type of guy. I think that organizationally speaking, there is something to that, right? I think the Mariners we talked about the Mariners were flat when Julio was out. Julio comes back and the Mariners are kind of like back to this really exciting team. Adley's had the same impact, right? I think Acuna has that impact on the Braves. I think Tatis and his suspension has had that sort of kind of drag or negative impact on the Padres. You can't really undersell that. From a team success perspective, you really can't undersell that, I don't think. But yeah, the Orioles, it is really fun to watch Adley. I think it's
I've been just happy to see them continue on their positive track despite trading a couple of veterans at the deadline. I was worried that might be a bit of a chink in the armor, or just like you said, drag down
right.
The positive vibe, and they've continued to roll on, and Bautista is taking over the ninth and proving me wrong that he's going to take that job. So pretty cool. One last thing before we talk about prospects, just interesting overlap. When I there were 26 pitchers that improved their K minus BB by at least 4%. And there were 23 pitchers that improved their CRA by at least a half a run. 22 of the 23 overlapped.
Oh, you're kidding.
No.
Holy smokes.
And I did not expect that. And you talked about like sorting my war. Like one of the reasons I like doing this is it kind of removes like my narrative or any just like ideas I have. It's like what do the numbers say? What are the names that pop? Like you said, sometimes you get names you expect, sometimes you don't. But I was like, wow, 22 out of 23 were correlated between Sierra and K minus BB improvers.
Right.
Which comes to me like that old school stat of, we call it old school because it's not analytics based, or it's not velocity or movement or any sort of advanced stat. It's a kind of an old school stat, but run prevention and strikeouts and walks are 100% related. Just reinforce that to me. I
do think that I think K minus BB is just is the key, right? Unless the only time it's not, or the only time I'll override a lower K minus BB, the only time is with a sinker ball pitcher. Because I think you can see lower than optimal K minus BB numbers from pitchers that get lots of ground balls, right? Because a lot of those sinker ballers are not necessarily strikeout pitchers, but they're still very effective. Which I think actually is an interesting segue to our prospects. I do want to bring up though, This exercise was fun for me to see kind of that middle third, see who's on the ascent, look for some potential buy lows, that sort of thing. But I will add that, and this is more of just a personal, I think, value or philosophy that I'm starting to, that's starting to become more and more clear the more I learn for myself, is talent and scouting still overrides, most of the time overrides numbers for me. And it's especially within smaller sample sizes, right? And so all the scouting that we do in the off season, right? And all the scouting, that kind of bringing the different scouting ratings of prospects and things together in the off season and in previous years, those things can become devalued when we are looking at, when we have recency bias, right? When we're looking at, say, just the middle third of the season. It's not to put down the exercise we just did, because I think it's very effective and important, but remembering who the player was and remembering what has brought the player to where they are, and thinking, I think about it in terms of what's on the back of their baseball card. And so if I was to take, you know, if I was to take, so one of the descending players that I have that we won't talk about was Tommy Edman. And I couldn't get Tommy Edman for a first round pick in our league a couple months ago, right? It was this big argument that he was worth a hell of a lot more than that. Now, in my mind, I'm thinking of Tommy Edman as the player whose stats I see on the back of his baseball card, not necessarily the Tommy Edman of that particular moment. But the manager was valuing Edman in that moment. To me, the baseball card matters and the scouting matters.
Yeah.
You know, you roster Spencer Torkelson, and Torkelson's value is not very high, not as high right now as it was coming into the season. But you know what? You dig into his batted ball numbers a little bit, and you look at his pedigree, and you look at his swing, and you watch him play with your own eyes, and you realize, scouting wise, he's no different than the player that we thought he was coming into the season. He plays in a really shitty park, in a really shitty offense, but all of his numbers say that he's still going to be a very, very, very good first baseman. Is he going to hit 45 home runs? I'm not sure yet, but it's there in his bat. But I guess what I'm getting at is trusting that scouting and trusting who that player was before we look at what they've done over the last couple of months is a part of the narrative that I think is super, super, super important to remember. It's also important to remember, if you have a player who's performing really well recently, that there's a good chance that they might dip, and it might be good to sell high on a player like Tommy Edman, 2 months ago, before they get back to who they were. But I just wanted to add that as much as we love numbers and as much as we dig into them, the scouting piece and the history of that player is, I think, incredibly important when it comes to assessing their value.
Yeah, it's good. It's good context for sure.
The prospect segue for me was that the prospect that I did a deep dive on was Emerson Hancock, the Mariners pitching prospect. And the reason why it's an interesting segue to me is I think that he is going to be, because his two-seam fastball is such a big part of what he does. I don't know that he's ever going to, and he's not wild, but I don't think he has great command yet. I don't know that he's ever going to have a great K minus BB, but I think he has the upside of a number 2 starter in real life, and probably a number 3 starter in fantasy. Do you want to do your prospect deep dive first, or should I just kind of finish up with Hancock here?
Yeah, why don't you finish up with Hancock?
Sure. So he's 6'4", 213 pounds, 23 years old. He was drafted number 6 overall out of Georgia by the Mariners in 2020. Second pitcher drafted behind Max Meyer. Fangraphs has him as a 50 fastball, 60 slider, 50 curve, 55 command, and 45 future value. Pipeline has him 60 fastball, 50 curve, 55 slider, 55 change, 50 control, and 50 overall value. He's been hurt. Mariners, he pitched 43 and 2/3 innings in 2021. Mariners shut him down, being cautious because of his shoulder. A lot of prospect outlets kind of labeled him a bust right then. The Mariners are notoriously cautious with their pitchers as far as innings. I knew there was something going on with the shoulder, but I didn't necessarily believe that he was a bust as of yet. This season, he didn't go above 80 pitches in his first 13 starts. But in 14 starts in Double-A this year, 63 innings, 48 hits, 20 walks, 59 strikeouts, 2.43 ERA with a 1.08 WHIP, 7.8% walk rate, and a 22.9% K rate. So his K minus BB is only 15.1%. But if you watched him in the futures game, you saw, he was pretty dominant with just a two-seam fastball. Tons of horizontal movement with that two-seam fastball, kind of sat 95, 96. I watched his last start to do this prospect deep dive. And what I found was, interestingly, he does the same kind of turn his foot, his back foot to face home plate the way that Spencer Strider does when he's on the mound. And he's got very minimal movement. And it's a little bit of a short arm delivery, but tons of movement on that two-seamer. I didn't see him throw the change of the slider as much as I would like for him to. I think he's getting by in Double-A by throwing that two-seamer a ton just because it's such a great pitch. But and before I make a real decision about whether he's a player that I would want to roster, I would like to see the slider and the changeup a lot more and see him face major league pitching. But the arm is there, right? He certainly has the look of a middle rotation starter as long as he's healthy. And watching that start makes me really excited. I don't think he's going to be dominant. I don't think he's at George Kirby's level, but is he Logan Gilbert? As far as results go, if he stays healthy, there is that potential. Hancock for me is probably a back end of top 100 prospect list, and a better real life starter than a fantasy starter, but a starter worth rostering eventually.
Cool. Yeah, he really popped for me at the futures game, as we talked about. So my prospect of the week, before we wrap up, is James Wood.
I knew it.
Now of the Nationals.
Yeah.
So complete transparency, he was not someone who was on my radar until this trade. When this trade happened, went through all the players that were in the return, and Wood really popped out to me. And also he really moved up prospect list in the midseason updates. So as tend to happen, he's already rostered in our league. That's the way it goes. Yeah, he's 6'4", 6'6", 230 pounds, outfielder. So left-handed batter. He was a second round pick in 2021. He's a high A right now. So far this season, he's slash line is 337, 453, 601 with a 1054 or 1.054 OPS. The other thing that stuck out to me for being that tall, his K to BB is 47 or 42 strikeouts and 37 walks. So that's really impressive to me. You look at, with someone like Keith Law, his write-up on him, where he had him ranked 44th recently. Obviously there's not a great history of people that tall and strikeout rate. However, he has a 80 rate on his raw power. Fantrax have his raw power at 70. Speed-wise, he has 15 steals this year so far. But being so big, you wonder how much that's going to translate into the majors at some point. But I watched him take live swings on YouTube and just studied his swing. He reminds me a lot of a left-handed Manny Machado. He has a very relaxed posture at the plate. Again, swinging from the left-hand side, that might seem like an odd comp, but he, the way he kind of rests his bat on his shoulder, he just has a very relaxed approach. And I couldn't help think of Manny, the way Manny lays his bat on his back shoulder. His hands start low. I saw him both against right-handers and left-handers. He didn't seem, his swing was very smooth and didn't seem very patient and smooth at the plate. It didn't seem at all on edge. Or I saw him hit both low and high in the zone. I saw him go opposite way and pull balls to the opposite field as well. So I just looks very smooth. It's great physical tools and that size. How he grows into his body, being only 19 right now.
Mhm.
And he lost some weight coming into this year, according to some of the reports I read, which is speaks to maybe his discipline, to try to be the best athlete he can be at this young age. But yeah, just really interesting to see him in high A doing what he's doing and have that kind of play discipline
What do you
at such a young
see?
age.
What do you see as his peak type seasons, and where do you think he ends up defensively?
I mean, he's already an outfielder, right? So can he can't really go lower on the spectrum. I don't know if whether he's a I don't wouldn't think he'd be a center fielder, but
What about first
um,
base?
yeah, I mean, I'm looking at his arm. Steve Fangraphs, they don't have a rating on his arm. They have a 55 on his field, though.
Mm.
That's a it's an interesting it's a good question. I'm not sure. I don't know. He's too far. Seems really far away for me to confidently project where he would be.
Is he, I guess, is he is he a 290 hitter to you? Does he have that kind of hit tool? Is he more like a 260 with 35 home runs type of player at his peak in your mind?
I mean, based on his size and the tool ratings I see, I would think he would be like that 260 hitter more than a 290.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there is that correlation is something I want to study in the off season between max velocity and contact rate.
Mm-hmm.
Guys that make more contact, they tend to post lower velocities because they hit more pitches. But there's
Mm-hmm.
a relationship there. That's something I wanted to dive into and learn more about.
His pipeline has his run at 60, arm 55, field 50. Um, I don't know that it would impact me as far as rostering him in a dynasty league. If it would impact me, whether he's a first baseman or an outfielder at this particular point in time, it's kind of, he's going to be a plus bat at one of those regardless. But yeah, I think he's an interesting player. It's funny because it always gives me pause. A player who's that tall, Pipeline has him as 6'7". To have the kind of coordination that's necessary to not have or to have even an average hit tool. Um, you don't see that often with the player that's that tall. You worry about the levers being so long that
Yeah,
that the hit tool just doesn't work. Um, but so far so good with him, and I do think that he does have that potential. He's the player in that trade, that Soto trade, that offensive player that has the potential to be a superstar. I think Hassel's going to be great. I really like Hassel a lot. I think Abrams is going to be a very, very good player, but Wood's the one who could pop more than any of them. Awesome. I don't know why I knew, but I had a feeling that James Wood was going to be your guy. That's funny.
well, I mean, it's an acknowledgement on my point that I need to be more ahead of the curve on things like this because at this point, when he got in that trade, is how he came in kind of into my view, and it's too late now.
Right. Well, that's the league we're in. I think is not everyone in the league, but there are many in our league that like to take chances on players like that, right?
All right,
Um,
Jackson Chourio is another one. I
for
mean,
sure.
he's really ascendant, and he's been long since owned.
Right. Uh, Real quickly, if you could watch one game tomorrow, which game is it?
Yeah, I'm not watching any games tomorrow. I don't have one. What
Okay.
would yours be?
So two matchups that I love: Shane Bieber versus Kevin Gosman. So Indians, Blue Jays, and then the other one is Phillies Mets is Zach Wheeler against Chris Bassett.
Oh,
I really like that matchup as well. And then tonight there's it's Aaron Nola against DeGrom, which obviously is great. Anything else?
Wheeler's much more of a command and control guy than I realized. I always thought of him as a stuff.
Yep.
But looking at his stuff and his pitching plus recently, I was going through and he actually his location plus is stronger, despite his size and his velocity and just how hard he throws.
I think
You would
he's
think he was
more,
more of
yeah,
a stuffus, but he's more of a location.
he's much more of a
Which is
pitcher
really
than he is a
interesting.
thrower, right? But
Mm-hmm.
I think that
Yeah,
because he throws 97 and has a wipeout slider, I think the impression has been his entire career that he's a stuff guy.
yeah.
But yeah, Wheeler is very quietly, I think, an ace at this point. Super fun. You got anything else before we
Nope.
attack this trade deadline tomorrow night?
No, I don't have anything else, man. It's good to talk to you. I'm glad you're on your feet.
Thank you, brother. Likewise. Appreciate
All
it,
right, be
man.
well.
You too. Talk soon.